SECfans.com, week 11. Going to start it off with Alabama and Mississippi State. Miss State fans, we've done a few videos for y'all this year. And Alabama, obviously, we get into y'all a lot because you keep winning. So we're going to keep talking about you. So I've got Josh with me, as usual. Going to get nerdy with you, like we always say. Want to remind everybody, please give us a subscribe. It's week 11. You should be subscribed by now. But if you're not, please know that we're pretty objective. We're very data-driven, and you're going to like what we have to say. I guarantee it, even if you're a Miss State fan, and we may not predict your team to win. I don't think I'm giving away too much there with that. But Josh, we talked about LSU going into the LSU game. Obviously, we did our predictions, computer model, and I want to say the computer model had a lot more points in that game, but it was like 2 points off of the actual margin, and we were pretty close as well. So I think we were pretty tuned in on that game. One of the things that played out in that game, though, so I'm going to have you talk about a couple of things in combination. We like to talk about matchups and not as much transitive property because everybody's going to say, oh, look, Mississippi State really struggled in a loss against LSU, and then Alabama drilled LSU on the road. So therefore, Alabama's going to drill Mississippi State. But I want to talk about something different in that matchups in this game. We saw for the first time this year Alabama get slowed down by a really good defense. And with Mississippi State's defense, it's kind of reverse, where LSU doesn't have a great pass rush, doesn't have a great front seven, especially without Devin White in the game. They've got some talent there, but the real special sauce for that defense is that secondary. And for Mississippi State, it's flipped. And they've got a really good front seven, have a pretty good pass rush, great against the run, but struggle a little bit in the secondary. So I want you to talk about that in relation to the Alabama team, and if maybe there's some matchups there that give them trouble, especially in the light of what we saw in the LSU game, where Alabama might be coming into this game really banged up in the kind of areas like wide receiver and quarterback that they might need to be healthy to be able to take advantage of Mississippi State's weaknesses.
So Mississippi State, one of the things we look at our models is sort of where every team's at offensively, defensively, where your edges are. I think the biggest thing to take away with Mississippi State is they have a really good front. Jeffrey Simmons is an excellent player. Sweat is extremely disruptive. And they've been able to create a tremendous amount of pressure. And I think the read that both of us have on this team, by and large, is that I don't think either one of us thinks the secondary and the back seven is necessarily all world if you didn't have that front four. Now that seems like a bit of a backhanded compliment, and it is in its own way. But I think the truth of the matter is you do have that back four. You get the benefit of that, and it's helped the defense tremendously. Nobody's really been overly successful passing the ball against Mississippi State. Florida, oddly, was the most successful at 7.5 yards per attempt. I still haven't figured that game out yet. That Florida went 23 of 32, 72% passing. Maybe this is a little bit of the fact that Felipe Franks doesn't know when he wakes up in the morning, if he's supposed to be throwing with his left arm or right arm. But outside that, the last 4 games, Auburn, LSU, A&M, La Tech, every one of those teams is under 6 yards per attempt. Louisiana Lafayette had some success through the year, actually, about 7.2 yards per attempt. That wasn't all garbage time, but it didn't really matter much in a 56-10 win. I think in general, what you see from Mississippi State has been a defensive front that has controlled the game to the extent that the other team can't throw. And I say this as a compliment. Mississippi State in many ways reminds me of Clemson last year. The Clemson last year we were both a little critical of because we said if anybody could ever block them, you could throw. And when we say a little critical, it's critical in matchups like this. When you're playing a top 10 team and you've got to compete at this level, you start getting really, really nitpicky. And I kind of hate that I started with a negative because it probably, maybe it turned people off. Maybe now I'm coming too late around to say the positive side of it. Mississippi State doesn't give many people the chance to throw the ball. So the back seven doesn't really ever get tested. What we saw from Clemson last year in the Syracuse game, and then, not so much against Alabama. They had some success, but, Jalen Hurts didn't really throw the ball that well in general, was when people did block them and when they could extend drives, and especially Mississippi State has the same issue when you can force that front to rotate and you get Sweat and you get Simmons out of the game, or with Clemson, it was more like getting Wilkins, Watkins, and Farrell out of the game and getting the second string guys in. You can have some success, but Mississippi State is going to have the ability to disrupt the passer better than anybody we've seen do against Alabama, probably all season. And they're going to be able to disrupt the passer in a way that we really weren't able to see LSU do. And referencing that last game, one of the great problems at LSU is, only 8th in the SEC in sacks. So they only have 19 on the year. Mississippi State is 3rd. It's only 23, but it's still kind of a measurable difference between the two. But I think maybe the more notable things, if you look at tackles for loss, Mississippi State has 66, LSU has 48. Essentially, Mississippi State technically they generate 50% more tackles for loss than LSU. They're just much, much more disruptive. When you play an elite quarterback, and especially somebody like Tua, at least when he's been healthy, if you give him time to throw, he's going to eat you alive, right? He can make accurate passes. No secondary can cover for that long. Mississippi State has been able to prevent other teams from having that long to throw the ball. That's why they've been successful. I think Alabama right now at receivers banged up. I know Judy's been banged up a little bit, but the other guys, Devonta Smith, who caught the touchdown pass, didn't play a couple weeks ago. Then he played only sparingly after Ruggs got knocked out of the game last week, so Ruggs may not play. Basically, Alabama, from their starting 3 receivers, all of which are probably going to be first 2-round draft picks, realistically. Now they're down to one of those guys, and they've got Waddle, but one of the things we saw in the LSU game, Alabama had issues where the younger receivers were not where they were supposed to be doing the right thing. They were running the wrong routes. There was one possession where I think it was Shavers, one of the receivers, didn't make his correct read on press man or bail, and Tua overthrew it. And then I think the next play, Waddle cut his route short, and all of a sudden Alabama ends up punting because the receivers aren't where they're supposed to be. That is a factor. The fact that they can pressure the passer is a factor. So that's all positives for Mississippi State if they can get a pass rush. But again, the flip side to this, and I've spoken for enough, so I'm going to turn it back over to you in a second. The flip side of this is the same, by the same coin that Mississippi State's been very effective in a lot of these games in stopping the passing game. Early in the season, Kansas State, Kentucky can't throw the ball in general. They haven't really, 5.1 yards per attempt is good against Kentucky. They can't throw. I mean, that's not really surprising. But Auburn, LSU, A&M, and La Tech, all of those teams have been very inconsistent passing offenses. Auburn and LSU may be good teams by and large, but their pass protection has been lacking. We saw in the LSU game that LSU absolutely 100% could not block Alabama. Again, La Tech, 3.2 yards per attempt is great. UAB held La Tech to 4.5 yards per attempt. UTEP held them to 5.4. So it's not like they have been a very consistent passing offense either. So I think the interesting thing is I don't think Alabama's played a defense that is disruptive as Mississippi State. LSU secondary is better than Mississippi State's. LSU secondary is going to pretty much all NFL prospects. That's not a slight. But at the same coin, the other thing that's going to be interesting to me is Mississippi State does not play a team whose offensive line is nearly as good as Alabama's, nor a team whose passing attack is remotely as good as Alabama's. So it's an interesting matchup, kind of as two uncertain factors play each other to see whether or not pressure gets to Tagovailoa, or whether when Mississippi State can't get home in the rush, if Alabama is able to burn them deep in a way no other team was equipped to do.
It's interesting you said they haven't faced an offensive line as good as Alabama's, and they haven't, but the best offensive line they faced this year was Florida's. And you did mention that Felipe Franks, in spite of his ineptitude, has managed to have a decent yards per attempt game, at least compared to some other teams that have played Mississippi State. One of the things you noted, kind of touched on, but didn't spend a lot of time on it, surprisingly, given how long your segment was. You talked about the fact that LSU doesn't have a great pass rush, does have a great secondary, and that you have to get to Tua. They did get to Tua, but they had to decide how they were going to play the game. In some drives, you saw that they were doing all-out blitzes. They were sending edge guys. They were sending their linebackers almost every play on certain drives. And then you saw them, bail out where they were dropping seven. On the drives where they dropped seven, Tua destroyed them. And one of the drives that's worth noting is the second touchdown drive. It was a 2-play drive. It was a 30-yard pass to Judy, and then the really beautiful post corner to Irv Smith. They dropped everybody back. That great secondary and those linebackers, everybody back, couldn't get to Tua, and you saw what happened. Tennessee did the same thing. Pruitt saw people blitzing Tua and not getting to him and getting burned, so he said, all right, we're going to drop everybody in coverage. He was dropping 8, and that was just not working either. So talk about how, is this an advantage for Mississippi State that LSU didn't have that far outweighs, or I won't say far outweighs, but does the fact that Mississippi State can get to the quarterback without devoting a 5th or 6th guy, does that outweigh the deficiencies they have relative to LSU in the secondary?
I don't know that it outweighs them, but it certainly offsets it. And I say don't know if it outweighs them because I don't think we have a frame of reference, honestly. The SEC in general this year is not particularly good at throwing the football. It's just not. Question for you, but who do you think's the second best passing offense in the SEC? Let's say second and third. Who would you say the second and third best passing offenses are?
Yards per attempt, I would say Georgia. Overall total yards, I'd say South Carolina.
Okay, so I mean, if you're naming South Carolina as the third best passing offense, I think it's telling.
Yep.
In terms of yards per attempt, it's Ole Miss, Georgia, Tennessee, Missouri, Texas A&M. So those are your best in order. I think it's telling that Ole Miss's passing offense has been woefully inconsistent. When they've played better teams, they can't generate anything. It doesn't really translate. So their yards per attempt is very high because they either hit 40-yard plays or they hit nothing. Missouri has been much the same. And then so your two most reliable ones, really, Georgia, Tennessee, and South Carolina. None of those are scary by any means.
Right.
Georgia is competently good. I would say Tennessee and South Carolina are not really even competently good. They're just maybe competent at times. It is a down year outside Alabama, which has kind of made why their offense has been so stark. But, why do I say all that? Because to answer your question, is it an offsetting factor? We don't know. Part of the problem with Alabama, as much as they haven't faced great passing defenses, is nobody else really faces an offense like Alabama this year. So every game they go into, we don't really know how teams are going to respond. It's going to be that way against Mississippi State and Auburn. I will say this. I think the ability to get home against Tua is a lot more important than just dropping even above average players in coverage. He is too accurate. There was a play against Tennessee, and then the post corner you were talking about to the tight end in the LSU game. Those plays were undefendable. Those were 30 to 40-yard passes in the air to a crossing receiver across the field to the far boundary. They were dropped in front of the receiver in stride. You cannot defend
both were double
crossing.
Covered.
Right. Both were double covered.
At least had safety help.
Right. Both were double covered. You cannot defend an over-the-shoulder throw cross field to a receiver 40 yards downfield. No one is going to defend that. They will not defend that in the NFL. This is an NFL quarterback. I do think he's banged up. I don't think he's hitting those places. We've watched them all year, and early in the season, both of us were kind of wondering how anyone was going to ever be able to defend him because he was hitting every pass like that he attempted. It was insane. He has not been the same since his knee injury. I don't know if you agree with me on that. He's throwing high. And it's not high a lot, but all his passes are a little more off the mark. He was hitting the 2 foot by 2 foot Drew Brees window consistently. He's not quite doing that right now. I don't think he's able to bear down on his leg. That's been my theory for a few weeks now. And if when you drive the football, your power comes from your plant leg, and then when you drive it, you come down on the other leg.
And he's left-handed, so he's got the opposite plant leg.
Right. And he's not being able to really come down on that leg and drive the ball into the spot like he wants to. So they're all sailing a touch. I mean, it's not like they're complete misses. But I think that means if you get some pressure, you're a little more likely to succeed. It means you can maybe get away with having an open guy, and he might miss them in a way he would not have done earlier in the season. I do think it's true of all high level quarterbacks. The only way to defeat a Drew Brees or a Tom Brady or a Peyton Manning is to blitz them, because they're too good to let them sit back and pick apart coverage, because nobody can ever cover a receiver again, like a deep crossing route, and prevent him being thrown the ball if it's thrown perfectly.
So this is something we talked about, something else we talked about going into the LSU game for Alabama. And Mississippi State fans, Alabama fans, I know this is about Mississippi State, but there's so many touch points here because LSU has a great defense and Mississippi State has a great defense that there are some associations. Again, not transitive property, win or loss, but schemes and concepts for finally seeing this Alabama offense slowed. These are kind of important touch points. We thought Alabama would have a lot of success running the ball. We even said that we would see them run the ball more than we've seen them run it all year, with more intent. One of the things you and I saw we went back and watched a lot of film during the week after we did our video. One of the things you and I saw, and we think contributed to Alabama's really good yards per carry night against LSU, is that fact that they had to all out blitz the quarterback, and not a run blitz, but all out blitz the quarterback, which meant it put their linebackers out of position in the second level, and a lot of times out of position in the hole, which contributed greatly to Alabama's running game success. So not just looking at Tua, but also combining the fact that if the linebackers stay at home and aren't being sent every play, now are we talking about a situation where Mississippi State really might be able to do better than LSU defensively versus this Alabama offense, because they won't be at that disadvantage in the run game where they're overexposed or overleveraged.
No, I think there's absolute truth to that. So to kind of touch on the point he made, when we're watching tape of the LSU game, something that stood out to us a lot when we were watching LSU versus Georgia was how often LSU would drop defensive ends into coverage and bring safeties and linebackers to try to generate pressure against Georgia's run attack. That's part of Aranda's scheme. He's very multiple. He likes his guys to play, be able to do a variety of things. The problem with that approach was, I don't know how many times I saw LSU have two guys in the backfield on a run play against Alabama, but they were in the wrong place. And so they'd have two guys in the backfield and then they'd give up a 20-yard run, because if they missed, everybody else was often in man coverage, which means they've got their back to the play running downfield. And now you've vacated a linebacker or a safety. There's not a whole lot else left to do there. And I think the numbers back it up. So our model was 50-23. Obviously, it wasn't that high scoring, but and I want you to remember to ask me a question about that, because we can come back to it. But one, I'll say 20. That's a 27-point margin, and it was a 29-point margin in the game. And I can kind of actually explain why it didn't come out this way, which is why I want you to ping me in a second. But our yardage for Alabama was 4.5 yards per carry and 10 yards per attempt. And both those numbers swung 3 yards. So Alabama was 3 yards better with a run. They were 7.6 yards per carry instead of 4.5. They were 3 yards worse passing the ball, 7 yards per attempt rather than 10. And what that pretty much indicates, and it's the same thing I think both of us saw in that game, LSU brought a lot of, they dropped their safeties in coverage. They were bringing pass blitzes. They were doing a lot of things to defend the pass and make sure they didn't get blown up over the top. Basically, they needed the safeties back so they didn't get burned deep. And then everybody underneath, they would bring on a pass blitz. And then the linebackers vacated, and it meant that especially the safeties were not over the top playing the run and were not crashing the run anymore. So they were giving up about 50% or almost double the rushing yardage that our model anticipated, because they changed the way that they behaved versus past games. It did keep them from getting blown out with the pass, which I think arguably probably helped them because it kept the scoring down to a certain extent, but it left them very vulnerable to the run. And as much as Alabama was successful throwing the ball with almost 300 yards, I mean, Alabama ran for 281 yards in that ball game on 37 carries. 281 yards on not a million carries, less than 40 total. That's a lot. So, I think with Mississippi State, their front four, they're going to be more than happy to let those guys come after the quarterback and not bring extra help. They've got a lot of faith in Simmons, Green, and Sweat to be able to control the run and play the pass, which leaves the linebackers and safeties able to stay in coverage. That's not something LSU had the luxury of doing, I think, because they had to generate a pass rush that left them compromised oddly enough, in the run game. As I said, you can get disruption, and sometimes they'd hit home, and they had some negative plays they generated on Alabama. The first touchdown, or the first drive that was the first non-touchdown for Alabama, was caused by a tackle for loss. Alabama kind of ran into themselves on that play, but at the same time, that was LSU getting in the backfield making a play. Those were the blitzes coming home, but when they missed, they generally gave up 15-yard runs. Mississippi State's not going to do that. You're not going to see those big chunk plays, I think, in the run game. I don't think Alabama's going to be particularly effective running the ball because Mississippi State is so good against the run. However, and I think this is a big thing, that is all assuming that the back end holds up in coverage in general. Mississippi State linebackers are big thumping guys. Leo Lewis and Errol Thompson are great players, but they have been playing mainly teams that are more run first teams, in Florida included. And, those are 250-pound, 240-pound linebackers. I wonder if it's the same problem Alabama had in 2009 through the 2012 era, where they had, like Dante Hightowers and Trey DePriest kind of linebackers back there. And they'd play a 4-wide set and they get exposed because those guys would have to be flexed out in coverage. Alabama's going to give them 3-wide sets, and then they're going to motion out the tight end into a 4-wide set. That's going to force Errol Thompson or Leo Lewis or, to match up one-on-one with somebody like Irv Smith. That's tough. I don't think that's an assignment they can perform. So Mississippi State's probably going to have to do some other things defensively to counter that and prevent that from happening. That's going to be a chess match. I'm not quite sure how it's going to pan out because we haven't seen really Mississippi State have to do that yet. But I think it's something to keep in mind.
So one last question before we get into the model. We didn't think this LSU offense was going to be much of a challenge for Alabama. It turned out they were even less of a challenge than we expected. And I think part of it's scheme, part of it's personnel. And we've seen Nick Fitzgerald struggle early in the year. It seems like they've done a little bit schematically to give him more success opportunities, especially since the A&M game. And yes, A&M doesn't have a good secondary. Louisiana Tech is actually a very good pass defense. Gave Joe Burrow fits. Is this Mississippi State? And I will keep saying, this is a team that lost LSU, but LSU gave Alabama really no threat. Is Mississippi State somewhat more equipped offensively to give Alabama's defense some issues? And I say that because, one, you've got a true running quarterback. Two, you've got 2 running backs in Hill and Williams that I think are better fits, or actually more talented than Nick Brossette. So I think LSU wouldn't have a running back that would crack the 2 deep for Mississippi State. 3, the type of offense that Mississippi State runs with the ability or looks to the running back, wheels, screens, things that we've seen give Alabama fits this year. That's not what LSU does. But a lot of it is what Mississippi State does. So are they better equipped to maybe put some points on this Alabama defense, even though statistically they're about the same or worse than LSU?
I certainly think there's an argument for it. One of the first things to go off of, and we were, terrible, no good, awful people because we've kind of said off and on all year that we didn't think LSU was a particularly good offense. And both of us felt like LSU had some talent, but by and large, their offense was inconsistent and inefficient, capable of a big play and benefiting from the fact that they had a defense that would repeatedly give them the ball. And at times they could sort of get a drive together and run it for, have a sustained drive on the ground. But they weren't running it much more than 4.5 yards per carry. So that's not quite enough to sustain a drive if you ever take a negative play. I think Mississippi State is probably a better offense, weirdly, than LSU. It's a little tough to want to gauge too much from it, right? Because it was just the beginning of October in Auburn, LSU, Kentucky, Florida, they didn't score 10 points in a month in a football game. And then they played Texas A&M. They put up 28. Last week they put up 45. One of the things we're careful about as a channel is, what is a turning the corner moment? What's an emotional change? What's a change when you're dealing with different teams, different styles of defenses or offenses that causes you to look different? I think Mississippi State in general has a good running attack, a better running attack than LSU has. I think the passing game has improved substantially because Nick Fitzgerald has become at least semi-accurate throwing downfield. I think both of us saw the same problem. The number of plays in that 1 month period that Nick Fitzgerald missed an open target or an easy pass, especially vertical or deep, was pretty terrible. It got pretty painful. I think partly Moorhead has really come around to the realization that he can't ask Nick Fitzgerald to make those plays on the regular. And I think more importantly, they're doing a much better job of relying on the run game to try to make things successful. And when I say that, if you look at Kylin Hill and you look at his statistics and where they were successful, it's almost a blueprint to the success of the team. And Kylin Hill in that rough stretch, he couldn't generate much. When Auburn and LSU, they had 42 yards per ground on LSU with Hill. I mean, Auburn actually had 5.5 yards per play, but when they actually are able to use him reliably with a higher number of carries, they're a better team. In Louisiana Tech, I think something in particular is they got 8 yards per carry in that game. And Nick Fitzgerald was 5.9 yards per carry. Hill didn't get used as much because they used a million backs, but he was 4 yards per carry. And then they had a big play from Gibson, big play from Williams, big play from Keaton Thompson. And I think with Mississippi State, their ability to run the ball successfully when they're able to do that has been the thing that has allowed the passing game to operate. Particularly Louisiana Tech was having to stack the box to try to deal with Mississippi State's run game, and they were able to exploit that for the first time, really. And on the flip side, we've talked about this before, Alabama's run defense is very good this year, but they can be run on. So the fact that Mississippi State has an active run game, I think, gives them the chance to move the ball some. Last year they ran it right up Alabama's gut. Now that was a really just absolute hamstrung defense from Alabama. And that was a big part of it, but they were kind of, I think, had Alabama shell-shocked last year with their ability to run the football right up their throat, and that opened up some things in the passing game where I think both of us are also of the opinion that Nick Fitzgerald completing passes in that game last year against Alabama was the thing that really kept him in it because they had a lot of third down passes that they managed to convert. So it all starts up front with a run. Alabama can be run on. Mississippi State has had success passing the ball and success offensively when they get the run game going to a certain extent and force somebody to overplay the box and give them some opportunities. If they can't get the run game going, I don't think Nick Fitzgerald can pass the ball well enough to compensate. So that's the matchup that's possible. The reason that it could work better than LSU is they do run the ball better than LSU does, so that may give them an opportunity, but it's still dependent on whether or not they can get to that point, because if they can't run the ball successfully enough, the offense will never be able to open up.
So Nick Fitzgerald, we've been so just tough on him this year, and then A&M 11 yards per attempt, La Tech 8.7 yards per attempt, 4 touchdowns. And like I said, La Tech's a good pass defense, so that's actually not a bad number. I think that there's something going on with the scheme that has either simplified it for him, or he's just connected on a few. Maybe that's all it is, but I think he's probably coming in this game with a little more confidence, especially since he was, like you said, able to complete some stuff, some big third downs, not only with his legs for once, but also throwing the ball. The combo of running backs with Williams and Hill, especially if Hill's healthy. I know he was hurt. I don't think he played against A&M. He didn't play against A&M. If he's good to go, this is going to be the best running back tandem Alabama's seen all year, and then you throw in the fact that they've got an excellent running quarterback, and we saw what happened with Kellen Mond versus this Alabama defense. I think he was close to 100 yards on just a few carries. He was giving them fits. And everybody, kind of like you said, everybody always says, well, they've shored this up or that up, or they've gotten better. But it also has to do with who you've played. Alabama hasn't played running quarterbacks much since then. They haven't played outside of Arkansas when they gave up 31 points. I know a lot of it was late. They haven't played the screen teams, the team that throw the running back. But also, on the flip side of that, you know who else got better throwing the ball was Jarrett Stidham, and it was against A&M. So you wonder, like you always say, is it the player that's turning the corner, or is it the team they face that helped them turn the corner and provided a little fool's gold? So I'm not sure. I think obviously we'll find out Saturday, but I think we're going to see a little more test for this Alabama defense than they're ready for. Instead of talking anymore about this, why don't you just go ahead and give us the numbers? Let us know what the computer model says, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, the computer model obviously is going to favor Alabama, considering how dominant they are statistically. Any computer model worth its salt at this point is going to give Alabama a pretty significant edge. The first thing we like to talk about is intermediate statistic of opponent averages allowed. So that is a pure relational opponent quality driven statistic. What's your opponent average rush? What's your opponent average pass? How much did you allow in those games? Alabama's allowed teams 79% of the rush averages, and 75% of the rush averages. I was looking at the wrong chart here for a second. And Mississippi State has allowed teams 83%. Anything below 80% is very good. You really need to be below 75% to be elite. Alabama was above 80%, I think, midway through the season. They've continually gotten better against the run, and I think subjectively they look like they've gotten better against the run. Mississippi State's still very good at 83%. I don't think they're as dominant as maybe some people think relative to the teams they've played. The issue is for 4 games in a row now, they've played teams that average less than 4 yards per carry. So, Auburn, LSU, Texas A&M, Louisiana Tech, none of those teams average 4 yards per carry on the season. So holding teams below 4 yards per carry in that game is actually expected. That's the thing that's kind of dragging Mississippi State down a bit. It's really the quality of their opponents. And even there, really the thing that's buoying them, Louisiana Lafayette is the only team averaging over 5 yards per carry. So I think that's kind of, it's telling. It is what it is. But I think also the fact that they shut down Kentucky, who's a very good rush offense for the most part in that game, is also telling that they're a good team. Turning over to passing defenses, both of these teams are excellent. It's much harder to keep teams below their passing average than it is rush average. A good college defense can shut down the run, can't really shut down a good passer. They tend to get what they get, and you just keep it down just a little bit. Alabama is allowing 78% of opponent averages. Mississippi State's allowing 76%. I think they're doing it in different ways. I think Alabama's pass rush is good. But they're a pass rush that's getting home because teams don't have anywhere to throw the ball. I think Mississippi State's pass rush is elite. I think the secondary is good. I don't think they're they don't have multiple first round draft picks back there the way Alabama does or LSU does. But they do have some first and second round kind of level talents on the defensive line. And so those guys are getting home. So they just don't give you time to throw the ball. We already spent way too much time talking about the impact of that and what it all can or cannot mean early on in the video. But really what it comes down to in this game in the model is as much as the defenses are pretty evenly matched, Alabama a touch better against the run, Mississippi State a touch better against the pass. Alabama's defense is just phenomenal this year statistically. 5.5 yards per carry, over 12 yards per attempt.
Offense, you mean?
Yeah, offense, I'm sorry. And then, Mississippi State's run game is a touch better than Alabama at 6 yards per carry, but they average half the per play or per attempt yardage. So every time, basically, if Tua completes every other throw and Mississippi State hits every throw, they're going to throw for the same yardage. That's what that number is kind of saying. And so when you plug in all the defensive numbers compared to offensive numbers, it's guessing Alabama. Both Alabama and Mississippi State should be able to run the ball okay, 4.5 yards per carry. But Alabama is going to throw it still pretty well at 9.2 yards per attempt. Mississippi State at 5 yards per attempt. That's not enough to work well. We usually say 6.5 is the breaking point for a passing game to be competent. Alabama 6.7 yards per play. Mississippi State 4.7 yards per play. And that comes out in the model, looking at everything, looking at your own, each team builds a unique scoring model for each team based off your past history and what's you've needed to be successful. It guesses based on Alabama's history, they should get about 44 points with this kind of production. And for Mississippi State, it guesses they should get 9.
So not looking at any of the numbers, just thinking about kind of a comparison. In your mind, without giving me your score, do you think this game will have a similar kind of feel to the Texas A&M game?
Texas A&M game for Alabama.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think that's probably fair. Texas A&M's maybe not as dramatic as that game was in some ways. Texas A&M's front is great against the run. Texas A&M's run defense is up until the past couple of weeks has been better than either one of these teams by a significant margin. They're not as good against as getting to the quarterback as Mississippi State, and they're not as good in the secondary. That's not shocking because Texas A&M is. Whereas I think Mississippi State is good in the secondary, A&M's horrible. So I think it will resemble that game in terms of flow. I think you're going to come about it differently. I think Alabama.
Yeah. And that's kind of where I was going with it. I mean, Alabama ran for 3.9 yards per carry, and it kind of, this was the first game where we saw them punt multiple times in the first half. And they got a touchdown off of a gift interception. You take that interception off the board, and that first half, it's 24-13, right? So that's where I was kind of getting at in terms of feel overall. It was the first game Alabama was really a little bit disjointed offensively.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny when we call it disjointed, right? That the first half would have only been 24-13, and Mississippi State beats Texas A&M 28-13 over the course of a game. And that's the reality of Alabama. And I think we kind of sugarcoated it honestly too much before the LSU game. Knowing that we both, I think, kind of had the score differential pegged. I think I had them by 24 points and you had them by something like 26 points. The model had it by 27. We all undersold it. It was 29. It's tough to beat Alabama because their offense is so good. And while I don't think Alabama is going to have the time to hit Mississippi State vertically, the way at times they hit A&M vertically, right? They hit a lot of big shots in that game. Just like the first play following that interception, they hit a touchdown pass over the top. I don't think they're going to be able to do that against Mississippi State because Mississippi State's pass rush is better. But the problem is, the point I made earlier, I think that Mississippi State's linebackers are not going to be very well equipped for four wide sets and all the weird formations they're going to see that Alabama can roll out there because they have so much skill player talent. And Alabama is going to throw a lot more short stuff, slants, out routes, and try to march the ball that way down the field. It's going to kind of go slower as a result. I think the scoring is going to come about the same pace we saw in the A&M game, but I think the offensive style is going to look more what we saw against LSU from Alabama, where in that game, Alabama did not hit very many vertical shots. They've been hitting at least one bomb every game, like a 60-yard bomb every game. They didn't do that. They took pass after pass after pass because LSU was keeping their safeties back and marched the ball slowly down the field, sort of picking on the linebackers and trying to hit quick stuff underneath. I think that's what Alabama is going to do, not because like with LSU that the secondary was so good they couldn't get separation, but because with Mississippi State, they're going to know the pass rush is too good. They know their quarterback's banged up. They don't want to get him hit. The best way to avoid that is to get the ball out quickly. I think they feel, assuming their receivers are healthy, Alabama's going to feel like they have an advantage there, as they will with almost anyone in the country. Really outside LSU, so they're going to try to get the ball out quickly and move the ball down the field. Because I don't think they feel they're. I would, if I was Alabama, I would not trust that my offensive line can hold up long enough to throw deep, even though they're very good, simply because of how good Mississippi State is in the pass rush.
Mississippi State comes in as a 25-point dog, and we saw last year where Alabama had to fight tooth and nail and kind of get their head back in the second half and barely hung on to win. I know it's at home now, so it's a little better, but they are just as banged up and emotionally drained. If you just kind of saw that LSU game, even with them holding the ball as much as they did, and even with them kind of winning in blowout fashion, I think they're coming into this game absolutely just mentally drained, and Mississippi State didn't have any injuries in the La Tech game. I think they're super fresh. So I don't know that Alabama covers this game. I'm going to go 31. I'm going to go 34-13. for this one. I just, for the first time this year, I don't think Alabama. One, I think the matchup is poor for them to put up a huge number. Two, I think it's gonna be. I still think Tua's hurt. I think Saban saying that Tua's knee is fine. He's not injured. The brace is just a precaution is crap. Because even Tua said himself that his knee gave out on the 30. I do think part of it is the brace. I think his knee is not in dire straits because we see him wince every time he gets up from the ground or he scored on the touchdown, he's wincing real bad. I think part of it is the brace, and I think it's keeping him from being able to plant on his plant leg and get the ball down. But I also think there's something there. And if he's without Ruggs and Smith, and I know Smith came back out, but he's not 100%. Hamstring injuries are lingering kind of things. He's probably going to be without Najee Harris after we saw that injury with him on crutches. I just think they're banged up. And I think 34-13, that's not a slight to Mississippi State. Mississippi State fans need to know that Alabama, and I'm going to make this point later in another video we're going to do, Alabama can blow a team out and that team still be a good team. And this is the outside of the SEC, especially outside of Alabama fandom, this is the narrative that gets played because fans are not used to being fans of teams that dominate everybody. So to them, when they see Alabama dominate a team, it just means that team sucks. It doesn't mean that Alabama is that dominant because mentally they're not accustomed to it. So do know 34-13 is not a slight to your team. That's actually given you a lot of respect. I think a super healthy Alabama team playing this game early in the year, it's probably 45-10 kind of game.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. My score is actually 34-17 for almost exactly the same reasons. I don't think Alabama probably covers either. I think if Alabama was healthy earlier on like they were earlier on in the year, I'd have the scoring margin a lot different. Simply because as much as the competition was weak, both of us watching as many games as we can, and we tend to track the top end teams. I say tend to track. We track the top end teams in the conference as well as we can. That's our show tends to focus on high end teams, and we nitpick teams that are playoff contenders. That's kind of been our thing. Alabama didn't have a lot to nitpick, and the throws he made early on in some of those games were just exceptional to the point that those would scale even up to an NFL level. He's not that on the mark right now. Their receiving core is banged up. They're missing depth at running back. I think the defense is clicking though, but I'm not sure that the defense isn't going to be banged up and emotionally let down too. So my 34-17 prediction is due to the fact that they're coming off an emotionally exhausting game. They frequently struggle with Mississippi State in this spot because of how banged up they are against LSU and how much they put into that game. None of that's a slight against Mississippi State. I think Alabama would be a 3-touchdown favorite against just about anybody in the country. After that LSU game, we're probably not going to see a margin for Alabama below 2 touchdowns the rest of the year, quite likely into the playoff. I know they already put the line in the Georgia game in the SEC championship at 14.5. So that's just kind of where they're at right now. Yeah, I mean, and I will say I think it jives a little bit with the model. I mentioned I wanted to go back to this, and I'll mention it very briefly. As much as Alabama ran a ton of plays in the LSU game, and they did, by the way. I mean, they ran 79 offensive snaps. They had 10 non-half ending possessions. That was it. They ran the clock out the last drive of the game, and they ran the clock out at the end of the first half. Otherwise, they had 10 possessions in the game. Most games, you normally get more like 12 or 13 quality possessions. The LSU game was a little weird because LSU could move the ball well enough to eat up a little bit of clock. And more importantly, Alabama had to throw short and earn their way down the field. You can't put up 49 points and a half if you don't get the ball at least 7 times. Alabama's done that multiple times this year. I don't think that's going to happen in the Mississippi State game because they have to earn their yards. That's going to keep the scoring down. And our model is looking at past games where Alabama was able to score so quickly that it kind of it doesn't inflate the numbers because it inflates the numbers on both sides, offense and defense, like 50-23 Alabama and LSU. It's basically expecting both teams to get a lot of possessions. that's probably not realistic. Alabama's not going to get the ball that much. Mississippi State's not going to get the ball that much. So that's why I have Alabama paring all the way back down to 37 points. But I'm also giving Mississippi State credit for more scores because I think Alabama's going to be a little too fatigued to be able to stop Mississippi State week in, week out. And I think Nick Fitzgerald is playing at a much better level than he was earlier on in the year. So our model that looks at the whole year evenly, I don't think it's going to give him enough credit because he's played at a much higher level the past few weeks. Even against air, there were throws he made in the Louisiana Tech game, like that corner throw to number 8, that were better throws than he had made in like a month and a half prior to that.
All right, I got one more question on this one, and then we can wrap it up. Assuming Devonta Smith's still injured for Alabama, but assuming Tua's fine, like he's the same fine Tua we've had for the last few weeks in these games, how many points is a healthy Ruggs worth versus a Ruggs not playing at all? Like if we know, I'll change that and say if we know on Wednesday Ruggs is 100%, he's going to play. There's no injury to the foot. How much does that change your score?
I think it puts it up about a touchdown.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that's the difference between, and that shows you that this isn't all Tua. It shows you that there's also something there with the talent and the ability to do things at wide receiver from both a timing and just an ability standpoint. I mean, Ruggs abused Greedy Williams on his first touchdown, and we haven't seen that all year. And the drop-off is guys that, are your third and fourth string guys because of how many wide receivers you play. Maybe not third or fourth string, but fifth or sixth option. So having 2 starting wide receivers and his tight end, I think, is huge. I think if you get down to 1, I think it changes by a touchdown. I agree.
Yeah. And to draw the analogy to Mississippi State fans that maybe aren't as familiar, so Mississippi State's receivers, Mitchell, Guidry, and Thomas, those are your starting 3 receivers, definitively, right? And it's the same kind of setup that Alabama has with Judy, Ruggs, and Devonta Smith. And there is a decent chance that you're only going to face one of the 3. And it has as much of an impact as it would with Mississippi State if all of a sudden you were starting, basically it's like you were starting Mitchell, starting Mixon, and then, I don't know, maybe Williams or Jackson. Those are your starting receivers. It has a really dramatic impact on your offense. So we're not going to see, I know we're not going to see Alabama's offense at 100% in this game, but depending on the receiver injury, we may not see it even really more like at 50%.
All right, y'all, that's going to wrap it up for this one. Please remember, comment below. Y'all been doing great with your score predictions. Maybe not always right, but neither are we. But you're doing great about getting them in the comments and getting that discussion going. So I think that's the key driver for a lot of these is instead of coming in with your flamethrower, actually, tell us what you think the score is going to be, giving us a little data. That's good. Please remember to subscribe below if you haven't already. Hit that subscribe button. Hit the notification bell, too, if you want to know when we put a video out. We generally get them out Monday or Tuesday. We also do put live full audio versions up, but sometimes I'm a total knucklehead on those and don't get them out till like Thursday. But they generally will be up there for your listening pleasure if you want. All right, y'all. Thanks so much. Have a great week, and God bless.